The scan came back wrong, and archivist Velen read it 3 times before he let himself believe the machine. He sat in the high catalog chamber of the survey ship Meticulous Ledger, where the air was kept cold to protect the data crystals, and he stared at a single line of return signal that should not have existed. The contact was old. The contact was metal. The contact was 11 kilometers long, and it was buried under 900 meters of gray rock on a dead moon that the concordance had marked 4,000 years ago as empty. Empty. The word sat in his records like a stone. His people did not make mistakes in their records. The concordance of settled accounts had catalogued every world in this arm of the galaxy. It had measured every rock, weighed every sun, filed every species into its proper drawer. Velen's entire faith rested on one belief, drilled into him since he was a hatchling clinging to the rim of the great library. If a thing was real, it was in the file. And if it was not in the file, it was not real. There was no file for the object under the rock. "Run it again," he said. His assistant, a younger cataloger named Tessic, tapped at the console with 2 pale fingers. The chamber filled with the soft hum of the deep scanner reaching down through the crust of the moon. The return came back the same, 11 kilometers, metal, a hull, a shape that the machine could not match against any record in the concordance's memory, and the concordance remembered everything. "It is a flaw in the sensor," Tessic said. His voice wanted very badly for that to be true. "The sensor is not flawed," Velen said. 3 returns, 3 matches. "The flaw is in our map." He did not say the larger thing, the thing that was already crawling up the back of his long neck. He did not say that a flaw in the map meant a flaw in the file, and a flaw in the file meant that something had been here, building, while his people wrote the word empty and moved on. The Meticulous Ledger was not a warship. It carried no weapons heavier than a mining laser meant for cracking sample stones. It was a counting ship, a ship of clerks, and its crew of 240 had been sent to this forgotten moon to confirm a routine entry and move along. Velen had expected an afternoon of dull work. He had expected to write the same word his ancestors had written. Instead, the deep scanner kept drawing the same shape on his screen, and the shape was a ship, and the ship was waiting. "Bring us to a low orbit," Velen said. "Center the scan over the contact. I want every layer. I want the rock peeled away by signal, until I can read the hull number off that thing." Tessic hesitated. "Archivist, the protocols say an unmapped artifact of this size should be reported to the Concordance Corps before we approach. We are to file first and look second." "We will file," Velen said. "We will file the most important entry of our lives, but I will not file blind. I will not write empty again." He felt the heat of an old shame in his chest, the shame of a clerk who has found that his ledger lied. "Take us down." The counting ship dropped toward the dead moon. Below them, the surface was gray and cratered and silent, exactly as the 4,000-year-old record described it. There was no light down there, no movement, no sign that anything had ever cared about this rock. And yet under the silence, the deep scanner kept drawing its 11 kilometers of metal, layer by layer, plate by plate, until Velen could see the curve of a prow, and the line of a spine, and the dark sockets where, on any vessel his people had ever filed, the engines would sit. These engines were larger than his whole ship. "Magnify the prow," he said quietly. The image swelled. The buried hull was old. He could see that even through the rock, even through the noise, it was scarred. It was patched. Whole sections of its armor had been torn away and welded back by hands that did not care if the seam looked clean, only if it held. It was a working thing, a thing that had been used hard and then put down to sleep, and along the flank, where his people would have stamped a clean catalog code, there was instead a row of marks that the machine could not read as numbers at all, because they were not numbers. They were letters, in a writing system the Concordance had filed, long ago, under a single tag: minor surface species, pre-spaceflight, no significance, system designation Sol. Velen stopped breathing for a moment. He knew that tag. Every cataloger knew it. It was a joke in the lower halls of the library, the kind of entry junior clerks were sent to copy as punishment, because it was so small and so dull that copying it was almost an insult. A wet little world, a loud, short-lived people who had not yet left their own gravity when the survey passed. Filed and forgotten, no significance. "Tessic," he said, "pull the original entry, Sol, the third world." Tessic pulled it. The entry was 3 lines long. 3 lines. For a species. The concordance had given the local hive stars and the great machine orders whole volumes. And it had given the world called Sol 3 lines and a dismissal. "Read me the last line," Velen said. Tessic read it. "No fleet capability. No threat. Recommend no further survey for 100,000 years." The chamber was very quiet. The deep scanner hummed. On the screen, the buried ship lay under its blanket of rock, 11 kilometers of patched and scarred metal, stamped with the writing of a people his own records had called nothing, and Velen understood, slowly and coldly, that the file had been wrong for 4,000 years, and that no one had ever come back to check. "They built this," he said, "before we ever returned. They built this, and they brought it here, and they buried it. Under our marker. Under the word we wrote." He turned to his assistant. "Why would a people bury a warship, 11 kilometers long, under the very moon we had already declared empty?" Tessic had no answer. He was young, and the protocols he loved had no entry for this. But Velen, who had spent his whole life reading what was filed and trusting it, found that he could read what was not filed too, if he let himself. He looked at the buried ship, at its scars and its patches, and its silence, and a terrible idea took shape in his careful mind. You did not bury a thing to hide it forever. You buried a thing to keep it. You buried it where your enemy had already looked, in the one place your enemy would never look again, because your enemy had already written the word empty there, and trusted his own file too much to return. It was not a tomb. It was a hiding place, and whatever was inside it had been waiting, under the rock, under the lie in the ledger, for someone exactly like Velen to come back and read the page at last. He pulled up the wider record while the deep scan finished, and what he found made the cold chamber feel colder. The moon was not the only entry near it marked empty. There were 6 such markers within a single day's travel. 6 gray rocks his people had measured and dismissed across 4,000 years. He had copied 2 of those entries himself, as a young clerk, and had been proud of the neatness of his work. He had never once wondered why 6 dead rocks sat in a ring around a quiet star, evenly spaced, like the points of a hidden thing. "Tessic," he said, "scan the other markers, the nearest first." Tessic aimed the deep scanner at the next gray rock. The return came back in under a minute. Metal, a hull, 11 kilometers, scarred and patched and stamped with the same forbidden letters, and waiting under the same lie. It was not one ship. It was a fleet, sleeping in a ring of graves his own people had dug for it with their own careless words. Velen set down his stylus. His hands were trembling, and a cataloger's hands were never supposed to tremble. He thought of the great library on his homeworld, the endless climbing halls of drawers, the proud motto carved over the main gate, "Nothing escapes the count." He had believed that motto his entire life. He had built his small soul on it, and now he was looking at 6 warships, 66 kilometers of metal in total, that had escaped the count for 40 centuries by hiding inside the one weakness his people refused to admit they had. They did not check their own files, they trusted them. They had measured these rocks once, written empty, and never looked again, because to look again would be to admit the count could be wrong. "We must warn the Corps," Tessic said. His voice had gone thin. "Archivist, we have to file this now. A weapon, here, this close to the concordance lanes. If these things wake while we sit and study them, we will be the only witnesses, and we will be in range." "Yes," Velen said. "Send it now. Priority above all. Tell them exactly what we found, and exactly where, and tell them the entries were wrong." He paused. "Tell them I said the count was wrong." Tessic worked the long-range transmitter. The message went out. A tight beam aimed back along the trade lane toward the heart of the concordance, carrying the worst news his people had received in living memory. Then he waited for the confirmation tone that would tell them the message had been received and logged. The tone did not come. "Resend," Velen said. Tessic resented. Again, no tone. The transmitter showed the message leaving the ship clean and strong, racing outward at the speed his people had perfected over 100,000 years. But the return path was silent. Something was eating the signal before it could be answered. Something out here, near the ring of graves, did not want the count corrected. Velen looked back at the screen, at the steady coal-colored light burning deep in the first hull, and he understood the last piece of it. The ships had not woken because his ship had arrived. They had woken because his ship had finally read them. 4,000 years they had waited under the lie, patient as stone, for the day a clerk of the concordance would point a deep scanner at the rock and finally see the truth written on the hull. That act of seeing was the key. That was the trigger. The fleet had been built to wake the instant it was recognized, and recognition was the one thing his people had been too proud to ever give it. They wanted to be found, Velen whispered. Not by anyone, by us, by the ones who wrote them off. The deep scanner finished its final pass on the first hull. The full shape lay open on the screen, prow to engines, every patched scar of it. And as the last layer resolved, the single point of light woke deep inside the buried ship, far down in its core, small and steady, and the color of a coal that had never gone out. Velen stared at that light. "It is not dead," he said. The light grew brighter, and far below, in the rock his ancestors had called empty, something 11 kilometers long began, very slowly, to wake. The rock did not crack. It lifted. Velen watched on the screen as 900 meters of moon crust rose in a single slow sheet, held together by a field he had no instrument to name, and then slid away to the sides like a lid drawn off a box. There was no explosion. There was no shudder through the meticulous ledger. The buried thing simply shrugged off 4,000 years of stone, with the patience of something that had all the time in the world, and where the rock had been, there was now a hull, 11 kilometers of gray-scarred metal lit from within by that single coal-colored light, and the light was no longer single. It ran the length of the spine now, 100 warm windows opening one after another down the flank, like a city waking before dawn. "Record everything," Velen said. His voice was steady because a cataloger's voice was trained to be steady, but his hearts were beating fast. "This is the entry. This is the correction. Whatever happens, the record survives." "It is moving," Tessic said. The great hull turned. It did not turn the way the survey ship turned, with thrusters firing and the whole frame groaning. It turned the way a fish turns, smoothly, all at once, the entire 11 kilometers of it, rotating in place until the knife-edge prow pointed up out of the open grave and toward the stars. Then it rose, slowly at first, shedding the last of the rock, and then faster, and Velen saw the dark engine sockets at the stern come alight with a deep, steady blue that was nothing like the harsh white drives his own people used. It was a patient color. It was the color of a thing that did not need to hurry, because it had already decided how this would end. "Pull us back," Velen said. "Higher orbit. We watch from a distance. We do not get in its way." The meticulous ledger climbed. Below it, the woken ship rose out of the moon and hung there a moment, immense against the gray cratered ground, and Velen could finally read the whole of it. The name stamped along the flank in those forbidden human letters resolved at last under his best optics, and he made his translation engine work at it, and the engine gave him 3 words, and the 3 words made the cold chamber feel like a tomb. Patient until provoked. "That is its name," Tessic whispered. "They named it that. They named a warship that, and they buried it, and they waited." "Not waited," Velen said. "Endured. There is a difference. A thing that waits expects to be used. A thing that endures has already accepted that it might never be." He stared at the name, and they built 6 of them, and put them to sleep where we would never look, and they trusted that we would stay arrogant. They knew us better than we know ourselves. Across the system, in a ring around the quiet star, 5 more graves opened. The deep scanner caught each one, a flare of rising rock, a long gray hull shrugging off its blanket, a spine lighting up window by window. The translation engine gave Velen their names one by one, and each name was a small, cold sentence, aimed across 4,000 years at the people who had written empty. Quiet was a courtesy. "We remembered you. The count was wrong." Velen read that last name twice. The humans had named one of their warships the exact phrase he had transmitted to the Concordance Corps, not 20 minutes before, as if they had known, long ago, what the clerk who finally found them would say, and had decided to answer him with steel. "How?" Tessic said. "How could they have known what you would send?" They did not know the words, Velen said quietly. They knew the kind of creature that would find them. They knew that whoever woke them would be one of us, a clerk, a counter, a thing that trusted its own files. And they knew that such a creature, at the moment the file broke, would say only one thing, that the count was wrong. So they wrote it on a hull and went to sleep. He felt something he had not felt in his entire careful life, a kind of awe that bordered on terror. They did not build these ships to win a battle. They built them to make a point. And we are the ones they built the point for. The 6 ships gathered. They did not rush. They drifted toward one another across the dead system with that same patient blue glow, and as they came together, Velen saw how their hulls were marked, and the markings told the rest of the story his files had hidden. Each ship carried, etched deep into its armor, a long list of scars that were not damage but record, battle tallies, dates in the human calendar, names of places his people had filed and forgotten, places marked empty, places marked harmless, places the concordance had measured once and walked away from. The humans had been here. They had been here the whole time, in the gaps between the files, in the worlds his people had dismissed, building, marking, remembering, while the great library wrote its tidy words and turned its back. They have been answering us for 4,000 years, Velen said. We just never read the replies. A signal touched the meticulous ledger. It was not a weapon. It was a hail, broadcast openly on the oldest concordance frequency, the channel the survey fleet had used 100,000 years ago and never bothered to change. The humans had known that frequency. Of course they had known it. The hail carried a voice, and the voice was calm, and it spoke in flawless concordance trade tongue, the kind of fluency that took a lifetime to learn, or a great deal of careful, patient study, by a people who had decided, long ago, to understand exactly who had written them off. Survey vessel, the voice said. You are the first of your kind to come back and actually look. We have been waiting a long time for one of you to look. Do not be afraid. We are not here for you. Velen gripped the edge of his console. This is Archivist Velen, of the Concordance of Settled Accounts, he said, and the translation engine carried his words back along the channel. Identify your vessel and your people. You already have, the voice said. There was no anger in it. That was the worst part. There was only a kind of tired patience, the patience of someone explaining a thing they had explained in their own minds 1,000 times across the long dark sleep. You read our names off our hulls. You read our world off your own files. You called us a minor surface species. No significance. No fleet capability. You wrote that we were not worth surveying again for 100,000 years. We read that entry too. We found it, a long time ago, in a survey buoy you left in our system and forgot. We have had it framed. Framed, Tessic repeated. On the wall of the room where we decided what to build, the voice said. Every recruit who ever crewed these ships read that entry first. 3 lines, no threat. It was the best recruiting tool we ever had. You taught us exactly what you thought we were, and then you left, and you never once came back to check whether you were still right. A pause. You were not. You stopped being right a very long time ago, but you never looked, so you never knew. That is the whole story, Archivist. That is the only story. You stopped looking. Velen was quiet for a long moment. He thought of the motto over the library gate. Nothing escapes the count. He thought of the 3 lines he had been so proud to copy as a young clerk. He thought of the neatness of his own work, and how neatness had felt like truth, and how it had been, all along, only neatness. What are you going to do? He asked. Nothing to you, the voice said. You came back, you looked. You sent the correction, even though you knew it might be the last thing you ever filed. That counts for something, in our reckoning. We keep records too, Archivist. We keep very good records. And our record will show that the clerk who finally read the page did the honorable thing and reported it. The voice grew quieter, but the correction did not arrive. You noticed that. Your message went out, and nothing came back. Do you know why? You blocked it, Velen said. No, the voice said. We have no need to block it. We let it through. We always let the truth through. That was the whole point of building these. Your message reached the Concordance core 40 minutes ago, clean and clear, exactly as you sent it. The reason nothing came back is that the Concordance core has already given its answer, and its answer was not to you. A new readout bloomed on Velen's screen, fed to him over the open channel, and it showed the trade lane behind the meticulous ledger, the lane that ran back toward the heart of his people's territory. It was full of ships, not human ships, concordance ships, war cutters, 300 of them, the heavy enforcement vessels the Great Library kept for the rare occasions when something needed correcting by force rather than by file. They were coming fast. They were coming for the moon, for the Woken fleet, and for the survey vessel that had been foolish enough to send a correction that admitted the count was wrong. "They are not coming to confirm your report," the human voice said gently. "They are coming to erase it. A correction this large is not a correction to your people, Archivist. It is a heresy. The count is never wrong. That is the foundation your whole order rests on. They would rather lose 300 war cutters and 1 survey ship and 6 Woken hulls than admit that a minor surface species built a fleet under their noses for 4,000 years. So they will arrive, and they will fire on everything, and they will go home and write a clean new entry that says this system is empty. They have done it before. You have copied entries like that yourself, Archivist, and never once wondered why the numbers did not add up." Velen felt the floor of his certainty fall away entirely. He thought of the 6 markers in their ring, the evenly spaced graves. He thought of how many other rings there might be, how many other corrections that had been fired upon and rewritten clean, how many other clerks like him had come back and looked and sent the truth, and been erased so the file could stay tidy. "How many?" he said. "How many times have they done this?" "We do not know," the voice said. "We only know our own corner of it. But we know this. Every ship in this fleet is named for a lie your people told, and then defended with fire. We built 1 hull for each lie we could prove. There were more lies than we had moon to bury ships under. That should tell you something about the size of the thing you have served your whole life." The 300 war cutters crossed into the system. Their drives were the harsh white Velen knew, the drives of his own people, and they spread into the wide enforcement formation he had read about in training files but never seen used. They were beautiful, in their way. They were efficient. They were everything the Concordance was proud of. And they were aimed at the truth, and at him, and at 6 gray hulls that had endured 4,000 years to be exactly here, exactly now, for exactly this. The lead cutter opened a channel of its own, and a new voice came through, hard and clipped, the voice of an enforcement captain who had never in his career been told no. "Survey vessel, meticulous ledger. Your transmission has been logged as a Category 1 filing error. You will cease broadcasting, power down your deep scanner, and stand by for correction. The artifacts in this system are unmapped and therefore do not exist. They will be removed. Your records will be amended. Acknowledge." Velen looked at that order on his screen, the order to power down the very instrument that had finally let him see, the order to agree that the 11 kilometers of Woken steel in front of him did not exist. He thought of every time in his life he had acknowledged an order like that without reading it twice, and he found, to his own surprise, that his answer came easily. "No," he said, "I have read the page. The count was wrong. I will not power down. I will not amend. Log that, Captain. Log it exactly." The enforcement captain did not answer with words. The 300 cutters fired. Velen saw the lances of white energy leap from the formation, hundreds of them, aimed not at the human ships first, but at the meticulous ledger, at the witness, at the clerk who had refused to unsee. Tessic cried out. There was no time to dodge. The counting ship had no shields worth the name. The lances never arrived. Between the war cutters and the survey ship, the nearest human hull simply moved. Patient until provoked, crossed 3,000 kilometers in the time it took Velen to flinch. 11 kilometers of metal sliding into the path of the barrage with that same unhurried grace, and the white lances broke against its scarred flank and did nothing. They did not scorch the paint. They did not mark the patches. The armor that had endured 4,000 years under a moon shrugged off the full fury of 300 war cutters, the way the rock had shrugged off the morning, and the human voice came back over the channel, still calm, now carrying the faintest edge of something old and tired and final. You fired on a survey vessel, the voice said to the enforcement captain. An unarmed counting ship, 240 clerks. That is the kind of thing your people do when the count is questioned. We have it recorded now. We record everything. We learned that from you. A pause. You should not have done that. We came here to make a point, not a slaughter. But you have just shown the archivist exactly what we have been trying to tell him for 4,000 years. And now he has seen it with his own eyes. And that changes what we are permitted to do. The blue glow along the 6 woken hulls deepened. Velen watched his deep scanner readouts climb as the human ships drew power, and the numbers were impossible. The numbers were larger than anything in his weapons files, and he understood that he had been wrong, even about the scale of his own wrongness. "You should run," Velen said to the human voice, hardly knowing why he said it, except that 240 clerks were aboard his ship, and he did not want them to die in a battle they could not understand. 300 against 6. Run, while you can. I will send the correction again. I will keep sending it. I will make them write it down. There was a sound over the channel that took Velen a moment to recognize, because he had never expected to hear it from the thing that had risen out of the grave. It was laughter. Not cruel laughter. Warm, almost fond. The laughter of someone hearing a child offer to protect a soldier. "Archivist," the voice said, "you misunderstand the numbers. You have spent your life counting, and you still cannot see the count when it is in front of you. 300 against 6 is not the count. Let me give you the real one. There are not 6 of us." The blue glow along the 6 hulls flared, and across the dead system, in every direction, in every gray rock his people had ever marked empty, the deep scanner of the meticulous ledger began to scream. Not 6 graves. Not 60. The returns flooded in faster than Tessic could log them. Hull after hull after hull shrugging off 4,000 years of stone, spines lighting window by window, knife-edge prows turning up toward the stars all across the system, and in the next system, and the one beyond that, a fleet that had been sleeping in every dismissed rock in this entire arm of the galaxy, waiting under every lie his people had ever filed. "There are 11,000, the voice said. "One for every entry you ever marked empty in this arm. We have been building one for each, for 4,000 years, and burying it where you would never look. You came back and looked, Archivist. You woke one. The rest were always going to wake the moment a clerk of yours admitted, out loud, on the record, that the count was wrong. You did that 40 minutes ago. So they are all awake now. Every one. And your 300 warcutters just flew into the middle of them to defend a lie." Velen stared at the screen, at the storm of returns, at 11,000 patient hulls rising out of 4,000 years of contempt, and for the first time in his life, the count in front of him was too large to file. The enforcement formation, which a moment ago had filled his rear view like a wall, was now a single small cluster of white drives, sitting in the exact center of a sphere of gray hulls, so vast that the survey ship's plotting system could not draw its edges. The cutters had come to erase 6 ships. They were surrounded by a number with 4 zeros, and not one of those ships had yet fired a shot. "Watch," the human voice said, with no triumph at all, only the quiet finality of a thing long decided. "You came to correct the record. Stay, and we will correct it together, properly, so that no one ever has to come back and look again." The enforcement captain's voice came back, and this time, the hardness in it had cracked, and underneath the crack was something Velen had never expected to hear from his own people: doubt. "Those returns are false," the captain said. "Censor ghosts. The artifacts are 6 in number. The file says 6. But even as he said it, the word file caught in his throat, and Velen realized that the captain was watching the same impossible count climb on his own screens, and was reaching, the way a drowning creature reaches, for the one thing that had always held him up. The file, the count, the promise that the universe was as small and as managed as his people had written it to be. "The file is wrong, Captain," Velen said quietly across the channel. "I know. I served it longer than you. I copied entries like the one that buried this fleet. I was proud of my hand, but the page is open now, and the page is wrong, and no order you give can close it again." He surprised himself with the steadiness of his own voice. "Power down your weapons. You are sitting inside a number you cannot survive. They have not fired. They are giving you the chance I was given. Take it." The captain did not take it. Pride is a kind of file too, and his was as deep as any drawer in the great library. "All cutters," he ordered. "Full barrage on the central artifact. Break it. The rest are ghosts. Break the real one and the ghosts vanish." The 300 war cutters fired together. It was a beautiful thing, in the way that a single perfect equation is beautiful. 300 lances of white energy converging on one gray hull in one bright instant. The light of it washed the catalog chamber pale. Tessic shielded his eyes. Velen did not. He had spent his life looking away from inconvenient pages, and he had decided he would never do it again, so he watched the full strength of the Concordance's enforcement arm strike the ship called Patient Until Provoked, square along its scarred flank. When the light faded, the ship was still there, unmarked. The barrage had carved nothing. Where 300 of the deadliest weapons his people made had struck, there was only the same gray armor, the same patches welded by hands that cared about holding and not about looking clean, the same long-etched list of dismissed worlds running down the hull like a ledger of its own. The ship had not even turned to face them. It had taken the worst the Concordance could give and had simply gone on being there. And being there was the whole threat, exactly as Velen had understood in the first cold minutes over the moon. That, the human voice said, almost gently, was your barrage. Here is our reply. Watch closely, Archivist, and write it down, because you are the record now. You are the only clerk in this arm who will file the truth. Patient Until Provoked opened fire. There was no storm of beams, no crisscross of color, none of the chaos Velen had braced for. There was one shot, a single line of light, thin and white and absolutely straight, leapt from the prow of the human ship and crossed the gap to the enforcement formation. And it did not strike one cutter. It passed through the formation along its long axis, threading the whole 300-ship wall as if the ships had been lined up and waiting for it. And where it passed, the white drives went dark, one after another, 300 lights winking out in the time it takes to read a single line, like a finger drawn down a list of names crossing each one off. Then the line of light was gone, and the formation was dark, 300 cutters drifting without power, without weapons, without the harsh white certainty that had carried them across the system to defend a lie. Not destroyed. Velen saw that, and it was the part that would stay with him longest. Not one cutter had been broken. They had been switched off, every one, as neatly and as finally as a clerk closing a drawer. And they hung there, silent and intact, and utterly helpless, inside a sphere of 11,000 patient hulls. We did not kill them, the voice said. We do not need to. Dead crews cannot carry a correction home. These will. Every one of those 300 captains is going to limp back to your Concordance core, powerless, alive, having watched one of our ships shrug off their best shot and unmake their entire formation with a single line. They are going to be asked to explain it, and there is no entry in your files for what they saw, so they will have to write a new one. The voice paused, and Velen heard, at last, the point that 4,000 years of buried steel had been built to make. That is the correction, Archivist, not the fleet. The fleet is only the pen. The correction is the entry your own people will be forced to write, in their own hand, that says, the count was wrong. We are going to make them say it. All of them. Forever. The 300 dark cutters began their long crawl home, and Velen watched them go, and then he turned his deep scanner on the thing he was most afraid to measure. Not the human fleet, the reaction. He aimed his instruments back along the trade lane, past the drifting cutters, toward the heart of Concordance space, and he listened to what his own people were doing, now that the impossible count had been seen by living witnesses who could not be switched off. They were panicking, and they were panicking in the way his people always did, by reaching for the file. The long-range channels were flooded with traffic, and Velen's translation of it made his stomach turn. The Concordance Corps was not asking what the human fleet was. It was asking how to unsay it. Order after order streamed out across the arm, and not one of them was a military order. They were filing orders. Reclassify the Sol entry as corrupted. Seal the survey logs of the meticulous ledger. Declare the 300 returning captains unfit, and their testimony unreliable. Issue a standing instruction that any vessel detecting an unmapped artifact of greater than 10 kilometers is to power down its scanner and withdraw without recording. They were not fighting the fleet. They could not fight the fleet. So they were doing the only thing their order had ever truly known how to do. They were trying to make the page blank again. They are going to erase us too, Tessic said. He had been listening to the same traffic. The meticulous ledger. They are sealing our logs. They are declaring us corrupted. Archivist, we sent the truth, and they are going to write us out of the record for sending it." "Yes," Velen said. He found he was not surprised, and that lack of surprise was its own kind of grief. He had served this order his whole life. He had believed it loved the truth. He understood now that it had only ever loved the tidiness, and that the truth had been welcome exactly as long as it stayed small. "They will write that we never existed, the way they wrote that the humans never built a fleet. They will close the drawer." The human voice returned, and it had heard the traffic too, on the old open frequency the concordance had never bothered to secure. "You see it now," the voice said. "You see the shape of the thing you served. We saw it 4,000 years ago, when we found your buoy, and read your 3 lines, and understood that your people would never grant us reality by writing it. So we stopped waiting for the entry. We decided to become an entry your people could not erase, no matter how many drawers they closed." A pause. "And here is the part you have not yet worked out, Archivist. The reason we cannot be erased." "Tell me," Velen said. "Because every ship in this fleet carries the file," the voice said. "Not your file, ours. The true survey of this arm, 4,000 years of it. Every world your people marked empty and walked away from, measured properly, named, recorded. Every lie, paired with the truth it covered. 11,000 copies, one in every hull, buried in every grave you dug. You cannot seal 11,000 logs you cannot find. You cannot declare 11,000 ships corrupted when you do not know where they sleep. We did not just build a fleet, Archivist. We built a library your people cannot burn. And now it has woken up, and it is going to read itself aloud, to every world in this arm, on the open channel, until the truth is in too many ears for any drawer to hold." Velen understood then the full architecture of the thing, and the scale of it made the warships themselves seem almost small. The humans had not built weapons. They had built a counter-archive. They had taken the one weapon his people truly feared, the recorded truth, and they had armored it in 11 kilometers of unbreakable hull and hidden 11,000 copies in the dark, so that the lie could never again be defended by simply closing a drawer. It was the most human thing Velen could imagine, and the most alien, all at once. They had answered a library with a library, and they had made theirs survive. "Begin the reading," the human voice said, not to Velen, but to the fleet. And the fleet began to read, on the open channel, on the oldest frequency, in flawless concordance trade tongue. The 11,000 hulls began to broadcast the true survey of the arm. They did not start with their weapons, or their scale, or their long sleep. They started with the worlds, world after world after world, that the concordance had marked empty, each one now named, each one now measured, each one now given the reality the great library had refused it. A garden moon the survey had called barren, which had in fact held a quiet people who had befriended the humans and helped them build. A blue world filed as harmless, which had risen and fought beside them. A ring of gray rocks marked dead, which had cradled this very fleet through 4,000 years of patient dark. The reading rolled out across the arm at the speed of light, world by world, lie by lie, and it could not be stopped, because there was no transmitter to silence and no log to seal, only ships, 11,000 of them, scattered through every place the concordance had ever dismissed. Velen listened to his people's entire catalog being corrected aloud, and he wept, in the way his kind wept, a slow clouding of the inner eye, not for the lie, for the years, for the 100,000 years his order had spent measuring the universe, and refusing to let most of it be real. "You are crying," the human voice observed. There was no mockery in it. "Why?" "Because it is beautiful," Velen said, "and because we could have heard it any time in 4,000 years, and we chose not to look. You did not have to do any of this. You could have come for us with the weapons you so clearly have. Instead, you spent 4,000 years building a way to make us write the truth ourselves." He shook his long head slowly. "We did not deserve that patience." "No," the voice agreed, without cruelty. "You did not. But the truth is not a thing you deserve. It is a thing that is. We only made it loud enough that your drawers could not muffle it anymore. That is all we ever wanted. Not your fear, not your kneeling, your honesty. One honest entry, in your own hand. And do you know, Archivist, in 4,000 years, you are the first of your people to give us one. When you said no to the captain. When you said you would not power down. When you said the count was wrong and meant it. A pause, and then quieter. That is why we did not let them switch off your ship, along with the cutters. We could have. You were inside the formation's loss radius. We threaded the line around you on purpose. We protect the ones who look. Velen looked at his console, at the survey ship that should have been dark and dead alongside the 300 cutters, and understood that he was alive on purpose, spared by the very thing his people had marked harmless, because he had done the one small honest thing his whole order had failed to do for 4,000 years. A new alert chimed on his board. The Concordance Corps had sent a final, different kind of order, no longer a filing order but a command, and it was addressed to the meticulous ledger by name. Velen read it twice. The Corps was offering him a way back. If the survey ship would broadcast a countersignal, an official concordance disavowal declaring the human reading a fabrication, a corruption, a censor ghost, then the meticulous ledger would be restored to the record, its logs unsealed, its crew of 240 returned to reality. All Velen had to do was lend his voice, the voice of a real archivist, to the lie. One transmission, one small act of unseeing, and he and his crew would exist again. Tessic looked at him. 240 clerks looked at him through that one waiting order. The easy road home was a single sentence away. Velen reached for the transmitter. He opened the channel to the Concordance Corps, and to the human fleet, and to every world in the arm that was now listening to the truth read aloud. He keyed it open, and he spoke, and his voice did not shake at all. "This is Archivist Velen, of the survey vessel Meticulous Ledger," he said. "I have read the page. I confirm the human reading. Every entry they have spoken is true. I have copied your false ones with my own hand, and I am ashamed. The count was wrong. The count was always wrong. Restore my ship if you wish, erase it if you must. But I will not unsay what I have seen. Log that. Log it exactly." He closed the channel. The offer of home died with it. And across the dead system, every one of the 6 nearest human hulls turned, slowly, all at once, the way a fish turns, and angled their patient blue light toward the small unarmed counting ship that had just chosen the truth over its own existence. For a moment, Velen thought he had finally pushed even their patience too far. Then the human voice came back, and it was warm, and it was the warmest thing he had heard in his entire careful life. "Welcome to the record, Archivist," it said, "the real one. You are in it now, and nothing your people write will ever take you out, because we keep it too, and we keep it forever. You looked, that is the whole of it. You looked, and you said so." A pause. "Now stay close. The reading is not finished, and there is one entry left that your people fear more than all the others. You will want to be there when we read it." While the reading rolled on, Velen did what a clerk does. He measured the reaction, world by world, and he wrote down what he found, because someone had to keep the record now, and he had decided it would be him. On the inner worlds of the Concordance, the truth landed like a flood through a city that had built no drains for it. Velen's long-range receivers caught the panic spreading along the lanes. Whole administrative moons went silent, their broadcast towers cut, their officials trying the oldest trick in the Order's history, and finding it broken for the first time. They were trying to declare the reading false, but the reading was not coming from one place they could point at and call a liar. It was coming from everywhere at once, from the dead rocks and the barren moons and the empty systems, from inside their own borders, in their own language, naming their own worlds. A lie can be silenced when it has a single mouth. This had 11,000, and they were scattered through the dark like seeds, and the more the Concordance shouted that the artifacts did not exist, the louder 11,000 patient voices read the proof that they did. "They are telling their citizens to stop listening," Tessic reported, his voice hollow. "An order has gone out. Citizens are forbidden to receive the human broadcast. Listening is now a filing crime." "Of course it is," Velen said softly. "When you cannot close the drawer, you forbid the eye. It is the same instinct, only more desperate." He thought of his own life, of how easy it had always been to not listen, to copy the tidy line and move on. He understood the order perfectly. He understood, too, that it would fail, because there is a thing that happens to a people when they are forbidden to hear something. They listen harder, and they did. Velen watched it happen across the arm in real time, a thing no entry in the Great Library had ever predicted, because the library had never imagined its own people doubting it. The forbidding made the citizens curious. The curiosity made them listen. The listening made them believe, because the proof was specific. Because the human survey named the exact worlds their own, had called empty, and any citizen with access to the old public catalog could check the lie for themselves in the space of a minute. The Concordance had spent 100,000 years teaching its people to trust the file. It had never imagined that one day the file would be the thing that convicted it. Archivist, the human voice said, returning, you are watching your people learn to look. How does it feel? Like grief, Velen said, and like the first clean breath I have taken in a long time. Both. I do not have a word for it. He paused. We had a motto, over the gate of the great library. Nothing escapes the count. I believed it was a promise. I understand now it was a threat. We told ourselves we were measuring the universe. We were sentencing it. Empty was not a measurement. It was an execution of the right to be real. Yes, the voice said quietly. That is exactly what it was. And we are the appeal. The human fleet had not moved to attack a single Concordance world. Velen noted that, and noted it again, because it kept being true, and it kept surprising him. 11,000 hulls that had shrugged off the full barrage of 300 war cutters could have cracked the inner worlds open like the moon. They did not. They held their positions in the dismissed systems, in the empty rocks, in the barren moons, and they read. Not one of them fired on a populated world. Not one of them issued a demand. The most powerful fleet Velen had ever measured was using its power for exactly one thing, to keep the truth audible. He had spent his life believing that power meant the ability to make others kneel. The humans had built more power than his entire order possessed, and were using it to make others listen. He did not have a file for that either. Why not just take the worlds, he asked, because he had to understand. You could end the Concordance in a day. Why only read? Because conquest is your way, not ours, the voice said. If we took your worlds, we would only be a bigger version of the thing that wrote us off. We would be deciding who gets to be real. We have no interest in that. We only want the lie to stop being enforceable. That is the whole war, Archivist. Not your land, not your kneeling, just this, that no people, ever again, can make another people unreal by writing a tidy line and walking away. When the truth is loud enough that it can never be buried again, we go home. We have a home. We always had one. You just never put it in your file. Velen closed his inner eyes for a moment. He thought of his homeworld, of the climbing halls of drawers, of the recruits even now being told to stop listening. He thought of how many of them would listen harder, the way he had, the way Tessic had. He thought that perhaps the great library would not survive this, and to his own surprise, he found that he did not grieve the library. He grieved only the years. There is one more entry, he said. You told me. The one my people fear most. Read it. I want to be the clerk who hears it first, and writes it down true. Soon, the voice said, it is not a world. It is the last lie, the largest one, the one your whole order was built to keep, and we are reading it last, on purpose, so that when it lands, there is no drawer left anywhere in the arm, with the strength to hold it. A pause, and Velen heard the 11,000 hulls draw their patient power up to a pitch he had not heard before, a deep tone under the reading, like the held breath of something vast. It is about your founders, Archivist, about what the count was for, in the very beginning, about the first world your people marked empty, and what was living on it when they did. Sit with your record open. This is the one you came all this way to write. The held tone broke, and the 11,000 hulls began to read the last entry, and Velen, with his record open and his hands steady, learned the lie his whole order had been built to keep. It began the way the great library itself began, 100,000 years ago, with the founders and the first survey. Velen had been taught this story as a hatchling. It was the proudest story his people had. The founders had gone out into a dark and unmeasured galaxy, the teaching said, and they had brought it order. They had named the worlds, they had charted the lanes, they had given reality its shape by writing it down, and where they found nothing, they had honestly recorded nothing, and the honesty of that nothing was the bedrock of the count. Empty meant empty. The founders had never lied. That was the faith. The human reading took that story apart, world by world, in the founders' own surviving words. Because the humans had the founders' words. That was the thing Velen could not have imagined. Somewhere in 4,000 years of patient salvage through the dismissed systems, the humans had recovered the Founders' original survey logs, the raw records, the ones the Great Library had locked away, and then, over the long centuries, quietly destroyed every public copy of. The Founders had not destroyed the originals. They had buried them, on a dead world, marked empty, exactly as they would later teach their children to do, and the humans had gone and dug them up, because the humans, unlike the concordance, went back and looked. The originals did not say empty. They said inhabited. World after world that the founding survey had publicly marked empty, the raw logs marked inhabited, and beside each one the Founders had written a second word, a private word, a word that never made it into the public count, cleared. The first world the concordance had ever called empty had not been empty. It had held a people, a quiet, young, unremarkable people who had not yet left their gravity. The Founders had measured them, judged them of no significance, and cleared them, so that the lane could run straight and the map could be tidy. And then they had written empty in the public record, and taught their children that the Founders never lied, and built 100,000-year faith on a grave. Empty was never a measurement, the human voice said, into the silence that had fallen over the whole arm. We told you that already. Now you know how true it was. Your Founders did not find empty worlds. They made them, and then they filed the word that hid what they had done, and they made that word holy, so that no child of theirs would ever question it. That is the count, archivist. That is the bedrock. That is the thing you served. It was never about measuring the universe. It was about deciding who was allowed to stay in it, and then forgetting, on purpose, that a choice had been made. Velen sat very still. He thought of the motto over the gate. Nothing escapes the count. He had believed it was a promise of completeness. He understood now it was a confession. Nothing escaped. Nothing was allowed to. The worlds that did not fit the tidy map were cleared, and then filed as empty. And the word empty was not a description of what had been found, but a description of what had been done. His entire order was a machine for forgetting its own crimes, and he had been one of its hands, and he had been proud of his neat copying, and his neat copies had each been a small stone laid over a grave. Why us? He managed. Why did the Founders never clear you? The humans. You were exactly the kind of people they cleared. Young, unremarkable, not yet off your world. 3 lines, no significance. Why are you here to read this, when those others are only a word? The human voice was quiet for a long moment, and when it answered with the only mercy the whole long story contained. They tried, it said, 4,000 years ago, after the first survey, when your people came back through our arm to clean up the loose ends. A clearance fleet came to Seoul. We were exactly what you said, young, loud, not yet off our world. No fleet capability, no threat. The clearance fleet measured us, judged us of no significance, and prepared to do what the Founders did to the first world and to 1,000 worlds after it. To clear us, and file the word empty, and move on. And, Velen whispered. And we were small, the voice said, but we were not silent. One of your clearance ships had a fault, a cracked seal in its records vault, and when it came low over our world, a single Founder log spilled out into our oldest signal bands. By accident, a fragment, a few worlds, a few of those second words. Cleared, cleared, cleared. We did not understand the language yet. It took us a long time to learn it, but we kept the fragment. We built our whole future around understanding it, and by the time your clearance fleet returned, a generation later, to finish what it had started, we had understood it well enough to know exactly what was coming, and we had done the one thing no cleared world had ever managed to do in 100,000 years. You hid, Velen said. We endured, the voice corrected, gently, and Velen heard again the difference it had drawn at the very start, over the open grave. We let them think they had cleared us. We went quiet. We let them file the word. And then, in the dark, in the systems they had already marked empty, in the graves they had already dug for other peoples, we began to build. One hull for every lie we could prove, a library that could not be burned. And we waited, 4,000 years, for the count to send one of its own back to look. Not to fight us, to find us. Because a fleet can be called a censor ghost, but a clerk of the concordance, standing on the record, saying with his own voice that the count was wrong. "That is the one thing your order has no drawer for." The voice softened further, all the way down to something almost tender. "That is you, Archivist. You are the entry 4,000 years of patience was waiting to write. We did not wake for the cutters. We did not wake for the war. We woke for you." Velen understood then the full and terrible weight of the small, honest thing he had done. He had thought himself a minor clerk on a minor ship, the least significant figure in the whole vast architecture of the Count. He had been, instead, the keystone. The entire patient design of 11,000 hulls and 4,000 years had hung on a single act that no power could force and no fleet could fake. A child of the liars, choosing the truth, out loud, on the record, of his own free will. The humans could build anything. They could not build that. Only Velen could give it, and he had given it before he ever understood what it was worth. The Concordance core made its final move. Velen saw it come, and could not stop it. A last command, broadcast on every frequency, overriding everything, the deepest protocol the Great Library possessed. It was not aimed at the human fleet. It was aimed at the Count itself. The core was ordering a full purge, a deletion of the entire public catalog of the arm, every entry, true and false alike, the whole 100,000-year record, wiped clean in a single stroke. If the file could be used to convict them, the founders' heirs would destroy the file. They would rather have no record at all than a record that told the truth. They would rather make the whole arm unmeasured, unnamed, unreal, than admit a single grave. It was the most honest thing the Concordance had ever done, Velen thought, in the half-second before it landed. It was the founders' crime, performed one last time, in the open, for everyone to see. Faced with a truth they could not bury, they would clear the entire universe and file the word empty over all of it. The purge command reached the Great Library. The catalog began to delete, and 11,000 human hulls, scattered through every dismissed system in the arm, each carrying a complete and armored copy of the true survey, began, all at once, in flawless Concordance trade tongue, to read the catalog back. The core could delete its own copy, it could not delete theirs. As fast as the Great Library erased an entry, the fleet broadcast it again, restored, corrected, paired with the true word the founders had hidden. The purge that was meant to destroy the record, instead became the moment the false record died, and the true one took its place. Transmitted from 11,000 graves the Concordance had dug with its own careless hands, into every ear in the arm, beyond any drawer, beyond any reach, forever. "You tried to clear the universe," the human voice said to the silent, beaten core, "and for the first and only time there was iron in it. We kept it, all of it. Every world you ever erased is in our hold, named, real, waiting to be read back to the people who descend from the ones you cleared. You cannot make them empty again. You will never be able to make anything empty again. The count is over. The looking has begun." A pause. "And it began in the end, with one of your own clerks, who read the page, and would not unsee it. Remember his name. We always will." But the core was not finished, and Velen had served it too long to believe it would ever simply stop. He watched his board, and he saw the Great Library reach, in its last desperation, for the only weapon it had left, that the human fleet had not already answered. It reached for his people themselves. A new transmission flooded the arm, and it was not a filing order, and not a purge command. It was a call to arms, and it was a lie wrapped around a truth, and Velen understood at once how dangerous it was. The core declared that the human fleet was an invader. It declared that the reading was a weapon designed to break the faith that held the Concordance together. It called on every citizen, every world, every captain who still had power in his drives, to rise and defend the Count against the 11,000 hulls that had come to destroy their way of life. And it was clever, because it was almost true. The human fleet had broken the faith. The reading had ended the Count. A frightened people, told that their entire world was under attack, will fight even for a lie, especially for a lie, because the lie is the floor they are standing on. For the first time since the moon had opened, Velen was truly afraid, not of the humans, of his own kind. He had seen what fear did to the enforcement captain, the way the man had clung to the file even as it crumbled. Now the core was offering that same drowning grip to a whole civilization, and across the arm, Velen's receivers began to catch the answer. Drives lighting, yards opening. Worlds Velen had thought too small to matter, arming what little they had and turning it outward, toward the dismissed systems, toward the graves, toward the reading. They are coming, Tessic said. All of them. The core has told them they are about to be conquered, and they believe it, and they are coming to die for the thing that has been lying to them for 100,000 years. Then the humans will have to kill them, Velen said, and the words tasted like ash, because he had begun, against all sense, to admire the patient fleet, and he did not want to watch it become the thing it had refused to become. 11,000 hulls against the whole rising arm. The core has finally found a way to make them choose. Slaughter my people, or let the lie win. Either way, the core spoils what they built. He gripped the console. It would rather burn its own children than let the truth stand clean. That is the count. That is the bedrock. I see it all now. The human voice came back, and it was not afraid, and it was not angry, and Velen realized with a slow chill that the humans had foreseen even this, 4,000 years ago, the way they had foreseen everything else about the people who wrote them off. We will not kill them, the voice said. We knew the core would do this. It is the last thing a liar reaches for, always, in the end. When the lie cannot be defended, make the people the shield. Make them charge so that the truth has to choose between dying and killing them. It is an old trap. Your founders used it on 3 worlds we have records of. It works, because good people will die for a floor they cannot bear to lose. A pause. So we will not let them die, and we will not take the bait, and we will do the one thing the core cannot survive. We will read the call to arms back too. And the fleet did. As the frightened ships of the arm rose and charged toward the graves, the 11,000 hulls broadcast, on the open channel, the core's own purge command, and the founders' own clearance logs, side by side, in plain trade tongue, so that every captain racing out to defend the count heard, in the same breath, the order to delete the entire record, and the proof that the founders had murdered the first world, and filed the word empty over its grave. They heard their own leaders trying to erase the universe, rather than be measured by it. They heard, in the founders' own hand, the second word, cleared, cleared, cleared. Velen watched the charge falter. He watched it on his board, world by world, drive by drive, the rising fleet of his own frightened people slowing, as the truth reached them faster than the lie could move them. A captain does not charge for a floor once he has been shown there is no floor. The ships that had launched to defend the count began, one by one, to stop, to drift, to listen. The reading reached them, and it was specific, and it named their own worlds, and any one of them could check it against the oldest public catalog in the minute before that catalog was purged forever, and they checked it, and they found the lie, and the charge died in the dark without a single shot. You see, the human voice said quietly, it is the same weapon every time. The truth, made loud enough. We never needed the guns. We built the guns so that the truth would have time to be heard. That is all the fleet was ever for. Armor around an entry, patience around a page. The core fell silent. Velen watched its last transmissions sputter and stop. There was no surrender, because the count had no entry for surrender. There was only the silence of a thing that has run out of drawers. The great library, which had measured a galaxy and sentenced half of it to the word empty, had nothing left to say, because everything it might have said had already been read back to the arm in its own founder's hand. And across that arm, in the dismissed systems and the barren moons and the cleared worlds, the people the count had spent 100,000 years pretending into nothing, began, very quietly, to answer the reading. Not with weapons, with names. Velen's receivers caught the first of them, a faint signal from a world his own files had marked empty, a single voice in a language the great library had never bothered to record, saying, over and over, the oldest and simplest thing a people can say. We are here. We are here. We are still here. Velen wrote it down. He wrote all of it down. Every name, every world, every voice answering out of the dark, because he was the record now, the true one, the clerk who had read the page and would not unsee it, and he understood at last what the work of a cataloger was actually for, not to decide what was real, to witness that it was, to go back, and look, and write down honestly what was there, and never, ever, file the word empty over a living thing again. It is finished, the human voice said. The graves are open, and the dead worlds are answering, and not one of them will ever be quiet again. And 11,000 patient hulls, having fired exactly one shot in the whole long war, began, slowly, all at once, the way a fish turns, to lower their power, the deep blue glow softening along the spines. The blue glow did not fully fade. It softened, but it did not die, and Velen understood that it never would, because the fleet had not won a battle that ended. It had ended a way of seeing, and that does not switch off. It only settles into the new shape of things. The 11,000 hulls held their stations across the arm, in the dismissed systems, over the cleared worlds, and they kept reading, and the reading had become something the great library could never have imagined when it carved its motto over its gate. It had become a conversation. Because the cleared worlds were answering now, not all at once, not boldly, but steadily, a faint signal here, a voice there. Peoples who had survived in the cracks of the count, in places too poor, or too strange, or too stubborn to be worth a second clearance, raising their heads at the sound of their own names being spoken aloud for the first time in 100,000 years. Velen's receivers filled with them. He logged every one. We are here. We held on. We did not know there were others. The arm, which the concordance had spent its whole existence flattening into a tidy map of full worlds and empty ones, was waking up and discovering it had never been empty at all. It had only been silenced. This is what you wanted, Velen said to the human voice. Not the war. This. This, the voice agreed. Only ever this. A galaxy that knows it is not alone, because no one is allowed to write the others out anymore. We are a young people, Archivist. Your own files said so. We had not even left our gravity when your founders measured us and reached for the word. But the young see clearly sometimes. The things the old have trained themselves not to look at. We saw what empty meant the first time we heard it spoken over the second word, and we decided that whatever it cost, however long it took, we would make it so that empty could never be a weapon again. A pause. It cost 4,000 years. It was worth every one. Velen thought of the cost on the other side, the side his people would have to pay. The great library was finished. The faith that held the concordance together was broken beyond any mending, because a faith built on the founders never lied, cannot survive the founders' own logs read aloud in their own hand. His civilization would not fall in fire. It would fall the slower, stranger way, the way a thing falls when the floor under it is revealed to have always been a lie. There would be grief on a scale his people had no entry for. There would be a generation, his own, that had to learn to live without the count, without the comfortable certainty that the universe was small and managed, and theirs to measure. He found, looking at it honestly, that he was not sorry. What happens to us now? He asked. My people, the concordance. You have ended the count. You could end us next. You have the strength. After what the founders did, after what the core just tried to do, after 100,000 years of graves filed as empty, no one in the arm would lift a hand to stop you. We know, the voice said, that is exactly why we will not. And Velen heard, in those few words, the whole distance between the humans and the order that had dismissed them. You are measuring us by the count again, Archivist. You are asking, now that we are strong and you are weak, what we will write over you. Full or empty, worthy or cleared. You cannot help it. It is the only ruler your people were ever given. But we do not measure that way. We never did. We are not here to decide whether you deserve to exist. We are here to make sure no one ever gets to decide that about anyone again, and that has to include you, or it means nothing. A pause. Your people are real. They were always real, even when they were monstrous, even when they were liars, even now. We will not clear you. We will do the thing your founders could not imagine doing to anyone. We will let you stay, and we will let you be measured by the truth, and we will trust the truth to be enough. Velen closed his inner eyes. Somewhere far behind him, in the heart of the territory that had been the concordance, his homeworld was learning what its founders had done. The great library, with its climbing halls of drawers, was learning that every drawer was a tombstone. He thought of the recruits told to stop listening, and how they had listened harder, and he thought that perhaps that was where it would begin, the long, slow, honest work of becoming a people who looked. It would take longer than 4,000 years, maybe, but it would begin. And it would begin because 11,000 patient hulls had refused, even in victory, even when they held the whole arm in their hands, to become the thing that wrote others out. The drifting war cutters reached the edge of the system, the 300 dark hulls limping home with their crews intact and their certainty gone, and Velen watched them cross the boundary toward the inner worlds, carrying their impossible testimony into the heart of a faith that could no longer explain it. The enforcement captain sent one last transmission before he passed out of range. It was not aimed at the human fleet, and it was not aimed at the core. It was aimed at the meticulous ledger, at Velen, and it was 3 words, and they were the hardest 3 words a creature of the Count could ever say. "You were right," the captain said. Then he was gone, into the dark, toward home, to write the entry that would unmake his world and remake it. Velen logged the 3 words. He logged them with care, because he understood that they were the second honest entry the Concordance had produced in 4,000 years, and that the first had been his own, and that there would be a third, and a fourth, and someday a flood, until honesty was no longer rare among his people but ordinary, the way it should have been all along. The captain looked, the human voice observed. In the end, they will, you know, more of them. It always starts with one. It started, this time, with you. A pause. We will be leaving soon, Archivist. The reading does not need us to hover over it anymore. It is in too many ears now. It will go on by itself, world to world, voice to voice, long after these hulls have gone back to sleep. That is how you know a truth has truly landed. It no longer needs anyone to defend it. Where will you go? Velen asked. Home, the voice said simply. We have one. We always did. A blue world your founders measured and judged and reached for the word over, and never got to write, because we would not let them. We have spent 4,000 years out here in the dark, building, waiting, reading. It is enough. It is finished. We are going home now, to a world that your file still calls minor, surface species, no significance. Something almost like a smile came through the channel, the warmth Velen had heard at the very start, when the laughter came out of the open grave. You might want to correct that entry. You are the only clerk in the arm with the standing to do it. Velen pulled up the Sol entry. 3 lines. No fleet capability, no threat. Recommend no further survey for 100,000 years. He had copied entries like it his whole life. He had been proud of his hand. He looked at it now, at the smallness of it, at the colossal patient truth it had failed to hold, and he began, slowly and carefully, to write. He did not write that Sol was dangerous. He did not write that it was powerful, though it was the most powerful thing he had ever measured. He did not reach for the words of the Count, the full and the empty, the worthy and the cleared. He wrote, instead, the only entry that had ever mattered, the one his entire order had been built to avoid, the one the humans had spent 4,000 years and 11,000 hulls to make him, at last, free to write. Inhabited, he wrote, by a people who endured, real, always were. The Count was wrong. He saved it to the true record, the one the humans kept, the one no drawer could ever close, and across the dead system the 6 nearest hulls, the ones that had risen first out of the ring of graves, turned their patient prows toward the open dark, and began, at last, to move. Not the way the cutters had moved, hard, and white, and certain, the way a tide goes out. Slowly, all at once, the deep blue glow trailing behind them like the last of a long-held breath, 11 kilometers each, of scarred and patched and unbreakable metal that had endured 4,000 years under a lie and risen exactly once, and fired exactly one shot, and changed an entire arm of the galaxy without ever once becoming the thing that wronged it. Velen watched them go. He watched patient until provoked turn its knife-edge prow toward home, toward the blue world that had been measured and dismissed, and had answered with 4,000 years of quiet, unbreakable patience. He watched the etched ledger of dismissed worlds along its flank catch the last light of the quiet star, every name his people had tried to erase, carried now on a hull that no power in the arm could mark. And he understood, finally and completely, the full shape of the category error his people had made, the error that no file could have prevented, because it was not an error of measurement, but an error of the soul. They had looked at a small thing and decided it was nothing. They had mistaken young for harmless, quiet for empty, patient for weak. They had built a 100,000-year civilization on the certainty that they could always tell what mattered and what did not, and they had been wrong, catastrophically, about the one people who had heard them say it, and decided to prove them wrong, with 4,000 years of silence and steel. The humans had never been the thing the Count could not measure, because they were too large or too fast or too armed, though they were all of those. They had been the thing the Count could not measure because they were patient, and the Count had no entry for patience, because patience is what a people have when they have decided that the truth is worth waiting for, and the Concordance had never once, in its whole long history, been willing to wait for the truth about anyone. The human fleet thinned across the dark, hull by hull, going home, and the reading went on without them, world to world, voice to voice, the arm waking up and learning its own true name. Velen sat in the cold catalog chamber of a survey ship that should not have survived the day, the first honest clerk his people had produced in 4,000 years, and he did the only work there was left to do, the work he finally understood. He kept the record, the true one. He listened to the dismissed worlds answering out of the dark, and he wrote down every name, and he did not file the word empty over a single one of them, and he understood that he never would again, and that this, in the end, was the whole of what the humans had wanted, the whole of what the patient fleet had risen for, the whole of the war that had been fought with one shot and 4,000 years of waiting. He looked at the last human hull as it crossed the edge of the system and was gone, and he wrote, beneath the corrected entry, in his own steady hand, the closing line of the only honest record his people had ever kept. They were here all along, he wrote. We simply never looked, and when at last one of us did, they did not make us kneel, or burn, or beg. They only made us see, and the galaxy was never empty again. The quiet star turned, the blue glow faded into the dark, going home, and 11 kilometers of patient, unbreakable, scarred and weathered metal carried the truth toward a small world that the Count had called nothing, while behind it, across a whole arm of the galaxy, 100,000 years of silence, finally, gently, began to speak. But before they were fully gone, while the patient hulls still trailed their fading blue across the dark, Velen turned to the one piece of the record he had not yet allowed himself to measure, his own homeworld, the great library, the climbing halls of drawers where he had been a hatchling, clinging to the rim, learning the motto, believing the Count. He aimed his receivers at it and listened, and what he heard was not what he had braced for. He had expected silence, the silence of a faith struck dumb. He heard, instead, the strangest sound his receivers had ever carried home. Argument. His whole world, arguing. Not whether the human reading was true, that question was already settled. The proof was in the founder's own hand. They were arguing about what to do with the truth, now that they had it. Some voices called for the old answer, to purge the record and rebuild the lie larger than before. But other voices, more of them, younger, louder, were calling for something the great library had never once contemplated in 100,000 years. They were calling to go back, to every world the founders had cleared, to take the counting ships and send them out not to measure and dismiss, but to find the survivors and say the words no concordance vessel had ever said. We were wrong. You are real. We came back to look. They are fighting over it, Velen said, and there was wonder in his voice. My people, they are not just collapsing, they are deciding what to become. Of course they are, the human voice said. That is what a people do when the lie finally breaks. The lie was the only thing keeping them from the choice. Now the choice is theirs again, for the first time in 100,000 years. Some of them will reach for the word one more time, but more of them will not, because the truth is loud now, and the young have heard it, and the young remember. A pause. You did that, archivist. We only made the truth audible. Your homeworld heard a clerk of the Count say the Count was wrong, and that gave every other clerk permission to say it too. We could fire one shot through 300 cutters. We could never have fired that. Only you could. Tessic had been listening at the next console, the young cataloger who had wanted so badly, in the first cold minutes over the moon, for the impossible scan to be a flaw in the sensor. He spoke now, quietly, and his voice had changed. Archivist, he said, when we go home, I want to be on the first survey ship that goes back to a cleared world. I want to be the one who finds the survivors and says the words. I want to spend my whole career undoing the entries I was trained to make. Is there a protocol for it? There is now, Velen said. You and I are going to write it. It will be the first true protocol the Concordance has ever had. Go back, look, find who is there, say their name. Never file the word empty over a living thing again. That is the whole of it, Tessic. That is the only one we will ever need. The cleared worlds went on answering, more of them every hour. Peoples who had heard their names spoken and dared at last to speak back. Each one rising out of the Count's long silence. Each one real, each one always having been real. Each one a small voice in a chorus that was becoming, world by world, too vast for any drawer ever to hold again. Velen logged them all. He understood that this would be his life's work now, this listening, this writing down, this slow, honest answering of 100,000 years of silence. He had spent his whole life deciding what was real. He would spend the rest of it witnessing that everything was, and that nothing his people could write would ever again have the power to make it otherwise. It is a good record, the human voice said, as if reading the entries over his shoulder. The best your people have ever kept. Keep it well, Archivist. It is the only thing we ever asked of you. Not your fleets, not your worlds, not your kneeling. Just an honest record, kept by someone who looks. The voice grew faint as the last hulls crossed the edge of the dark. We are almost home now. We will sleep again, most of us, in the new graves, the honest ones, marked with our true names instead of your false word. Not because we fear anything, because the work is done, and a people who have waited 4,000 years have earned a long rest in the open, under their own sky. Will you wake again? Velen asked, not sure why, except that he did not want the warmth on the channel to be the last he ever heard of it. Only if we are needed, the voice said. Only if someone, somewhere, reaches for the word again and tries to make a living people into nothing. Then we will wake, and we will read, and we will make them see. But I do not think it will come to that. I think the truth is loud enough now. I think you and your Tessic, and your homeworld full of arguing clerks, will keep it loud, long after we are stone again. That is the whole point of a record. It outlives the ones who kept it. A pause, and the warmth deepened one last time. Thank you for looking. In 4,000 years, you were the first. You will not be the last. That is enough. That was always enough. The channel went quiet. No more words came. The last human hull crossed the boundary of the system and was gone into the open dark. Velen sat for a long time in the silence the humans had left behind, which was not the silence of empty but the silence of full. Then he turned back to the work, and as he wrote the names of the worlds that had been here all along, he understood at last exactly what the humans had done to his people, and exactly why it was the only mercy that could ever have mattered. They had not made the Concordance kneel. Kneeling would have ended in a new lie. The word reached for again, the moment the fleet was gone. They had not made it burn. Burning would have left nothing to keep the record. They had done the one thing that lasts, the one thing no weapon can force, and no fleet can fake. They had made his people see, and then they had trusted them, weak and guilty and waking, to live with what they saw. It was the coldest revenge imaginable, and the warmest gift, and it was the same thing, because to the humans, the truth had never been a weapon or a wound, only the floor, the only honest floor, the one they had spent 4,000 years building under a galaxy that had tried to stand on a lie. He wrote until the quiet star set behind the dead moon. He wrote the names of the cleared, and the names of the woken, and the name of the captain who had said you were right, and the name of the world the Count had called nothing, corrected now, true now, real now and forever. And when he was done, for that day, with that small, honest portion of the endless work that remained, he looked out at the dark where the patient fleet had gone, and understood that he had not lost his faith that day after all. He had only, at last, found one worth keeping.